Hello and welcome to the Fifth Down Huddle. Before we get started here on this Thursday afternoon, check out the Instagram and Twitter page for everything NFL. Check out the YouTube for podcast, game recaps, game predictions, and other fantasy tips and tricks. Check out Spotify for the full podcast. All of those at Fifth Down Huddle as the username. But quickly through that, let's huddle up. First up this week, I want to take a look at some fantasy moves I've made here going into week 3, and some fantasy moves that you should make considering all the injuries this past week. And after this, I'll get to the weekly predictions, which is what I usually like to do on Thursday. Now, the biggest injury I personally sustained in both fantasy leagues was the loss of Christian McCaffrey. Team doctors expect him to miss 4 to 6 weeks, but McCaffrey stated he's going to attack whatever he has to do to get back on the field, which is a good sign, especially for fantasy owners who drafted him number 1 overall, something I did both in my 8-team and 16-team league. Now, the loss is brutal, as McCaffrey usually gets at least 15 to 20 points per game in a point per reception league. But luckily for me, I've got Josh Jacobs in my 8-person league as well, which makes the loss a little easier to deal with. Now, if you're in an 8-person league, here's some options at running back to replace Saquon Barkley or Christian McCaffrey, as both are out for a very long amount of time, Saquon Barkley in particular. Now, first off, we've got James Robinson, my current replacement in my 8-man league. He's the rookie running back for the Jacksonville Jaguars who has been filling the vacancy of Leonard Fournette well. Through the first 2 weeks, Robinson has averaged 16 carries, 2 catches, and 85 total yards per game, along with a touchdown. So granted, no Christian McCaffrey, but considering his 21-point performance last week, and the fact that he's matched up against the Miami Dolphins this week, the Cincinnati Bengals next week, and then Houston after that, and then Detroit, he has some great opportunities to put up big fantasy performances against defenses that have particularly struggled against the run up to this point in the season. Now, I'm expecting Robinson to have somewhere around 15 carries for about 90 yards and a touchdown in week 3, so he'll be a good option for the next 3 to 4 weeks until McCaffrey returns. Now, if you need him to replace Saquon, it's still a great option, and at worst, you can see how he does against these poor defenses and against Houston, and make the decision on keeping him as your number 2 back for the remainder of the season. If you are going to pick up Robinson, I suggest you also look for another running back, like for a full-time replacement for the rest of the season for a guy like Saquon. I also suggest you pick up another backup running back like Mike Davis for the Panthers, or like Devontae Freeman, for example, for the Giants, who I'm guessing they signed Devontae Freeman to take over Dion Lewis's current role that he'll probably have for about a week or 2 of the starting back. But yeah, pick up one of those 2 guys, pick up a starting back that isn't as well known in your league, that isn't signed on, especially in an 8-man league, just so that if James Robinson doesn't work out, or God forbid he gets injured, you have another option, and you don't end up in this situation again, where you're kind of rooting through the scraps, per se, in your league for a starting running back. Now, another option in an 8-man league, and if by off chance this player is somehow available in your 16-team league, which is very possible, he's a backup running back that isn't very well known outside of Christian McCaffrey's injury, or you think you can make a non-costly trade to pick him up, do it. I mean, if you have a solid starting receiver on your bench, or a solid starting tight end on your bench that you don't think you're going to necessarily need, that isn't crucial, you have to weigh that. Are you willing to risk this receiver for 1 week, because I'm guessing you have him there to use him for the bye? Are you willing to risk that receiver, one of your backup receivers, in order to pick up a long-term replacement for your running back? Because you need a running back now, and you're going to need him for the long term. You might not need that backup receiver in the long term, maybe only for 1 bye week. So if you can pick up any of these players on a non-costly trade, go ahead and do it. Now, a brilliant option for this week alone, and possibly next week, is Jerick McKinnon, a running back that has coupled 13 total points in both week 1 and 2. The back, normally part of a trio of backs, is now alone for the snaps. The other 2 backs, Tevin Coleman and Raheem Mostert, normally on that 49ers running committee, are both doubtful for Sunday's game. Now, only if both end up being out, put Mostert in your starting lineup immediately. Granted, he had 13 points in both week 1 and 2, so he's not a terrible option if one or both of them are playing. He's not even a terrible option for a long-term replacement considering the amount of fantasy production he's had within these first 2 weeks. But considering how short the season is, it's one of those scenarios where don't start him unless Mostert and Coleman are out. And if Mostert and Coleman are in and you don't start him and he plays well, puts up, that 13 to 15 point range, then yeah, start him in the 4th week. But you want to have a little bit more time to kind of ice out if he's going to continue to be reliable, whether it's in the flex or in the running game, in your running back position, whether it be number 1 or 2 for Saquon or Christian McCaffrey. But as I said, if both of them are out, this is a great 1 to 2 week replacement while you try to find a trade or another running back that might boom this week that's kind of unknown that you can pick up and put in a replacement for Christian McCaffrey or for Saquon Barkley. Now, don't start him until we know for sure that his teammates are. I don't want to tell you to start this guy and then he gets 4 points because he only gets 2 carries and 2 catches for a total of 20 yards. Don't start him unless you know that both his teammates are out. Or even if only one is out, he'd still be a pretty solid bet considering you got 13 with both of them in. So, again, it's kind of your choice there. But in my eyes, don't start him unless one or both of his teammates are out. And right now, it's looking like both his teammates are going to be out on Sunday. So he's a great option to pick up right now before it's too late. Now, for a 16-person league, the options are definitely smaller, especially for Saquon's injury. If the backup for the Giants, Dion Lewis, is available, pick him up for this week and next week alone. Then sign on Devontae Freeman either through the trade block or free agency. I only expect Lewis to have a game or 2 of production unless he really booms. If he goes out there, rushes for 100 yards, gets 2 touchdowns in 2 straight games, who knows? Maybe Dion Lewis will be the man for the foreseeable future for the Giants until Saquon is back next year. But at this point in the season, after a 10-carry, 20-yard on-the-ground day, after Saquon was forced out with an injury, it's really hard to expect Lewis to be the starting back for much of the season. So again, pick him up for this week alone. Then sign on Devontae Freeman, either through the trade block or free agency. I only expect Lewis to have a game or 2 of production while the Giants get Freeman up to speed. And once Freeman is up to speed in 2 weeks, he should be getting upwards of 12 carries a game. It's whoever that starting back is. So, if you can pick up both right now, it might not be a terrible option to do so because one of the backs is going to be the starter. All right, so not both of them are going to be a bust. There's a fair shot that one of them is going to be a bust. But that's a shot you have to take when your starting running back is out for the year in terms of Saquon Barkley. So those are my options here for the running back position. I'll post a video tomorrow morning if more open up. If I see more diamonds in the rough that I think are really going to boom here after the first kind of chunk of the season. But besides that, let's get into the game-by-game predictions here. Tonight, we've got the Dolphins against the Jaguars. I'm recording this, 10 minutes before the game starts. So obviously cutting it a little close here. I'm probably not going to get this out until about midway through the game. But what can I say? If I post it midway through the game, maybe my prediction ends up being right. But is this one really that hard to decipher? The Jags are simply the better team up to this point, not only in the win column, but in the quarterback and running back play as well. The Miami Dolphins don't seem to have made much progress in the offseason in terms of getting out of the current hole they are in. And the Bills and Patriots seem to have themselves together, but the Dolphins are in an odd funk between where the Jets are and where the Bills are that cause them to lose against pretty much any 0-500 team they play against. So, given this, expect Gardner to have a field day against that defense, throwing upwards of 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. On the ground, the Jags will find a lot of success with Robinson. As I said before in my fantasy tips there, expect him to have somewhere around 16 carries with over 100 yards and a touchdown from scrimmage. And again, the Jags are simply the better team here. What I will say, though, is that Fitz will put up a bit of a fight. The Dolphins' offense will produce, so expect the final game score to fall somewhere around 30-20 Jags. The Jags, again, are simply the better team here, so it's hard for me to find a scenario in which the Dolphins win this game. The only possibility to me is one in which Minshew struggles in prime time while Fitz feeds off the atmosphere of Thursday Night Football. Other than that, the Jags win this one 30-20. Now, the next game I've got is the 49ers against the Giants. It'll be a slugfest for the Giants as Daniel Jones tries to adjust to life without Saquon and without Shepard. The thing the Giants have going for them, though, is the insane amount of injuries that the 49ers have struggled with. Nick Bosa, Jimmy Garoppolo, and Solomon Thomas are just some of the big names on that team that will be out on Sunday. So the Giants just might have a chance against this 49ers team. What I will say, though, is that Nick Mullins, the 49ers' current replacement for Jimmy G at quarterback, has been through this before. I expect him to be poised against the Giants, and I expect him to have an average day for a backup quarterback. The 49ers will have a solid day on the ground with McKinnon, but it might not be enough to take out the Giants. This will be a match mainly decided by the team's backup performances and defensive performances. From Nick Mullins to Dion Lewis and Devontae Freeman, it'll be an interesting game to say the least. But I'll give the 49ers benefit of the doubt simply due to their overall roster and head coach outside of the injuries they have sustained. I'm taking the 49ers 20-17. Again, the Giants have suffered arguably the same level of losses in terms of importance to the team as the 49ers have, so it's really just a game based on overall adjustments to injuries, which I trust the 49ers head coach Kyle Shanahan to do more than Joe Judge. Now, the next game we've got is Washington against the Browns. It'll likely be a relative blowout, somewhere around a 14 to 20 point spread. Now, the Browns found great success offensively against the Bengals last week, and I think it's fair to say that Washington defense won't really be any more of a challenge than the Bengals defense was. And the key for the Browns is attacking the ground combined with attacking the play-action bootleg, in which the quarterback runs a play-action to one side and rolls out in a C-shape to the opposite side of the field, running in that direction until something opens up downfield. And like I said earlier this week, Baker thrived off of these plays. He was relatively unstoppable in this, throwing 4 for 5 for 87 yards and a touchdown out of these plays. Defensively, it'll be a game based on their ability to slow down Terry McLaurin. Although, even if Terry has a great day, it probably won't change the tide of the game too much. One wide receiver often can't change the sway of the game alone outside of Randy Moss, and often needs at least a handful of other game changers to do it with. I don't think Washington will put up too much of a fight this game, and I generally don't think that's much of a stretch. I mean, it's clear after week 2 that the Washington football team just is not that good defensively, and the Browns will feast on that with Baker. Expect Mayfield to possibly put up his best numbers of the season, somewhere around 250 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 0 picks. That Washington defense is bound to struggle against Baker if the Browns use his strengths to their advantage. It was proven last year and the Browns didn't attack it. Now it's been proven this year against the Bengals. Can they finally find more ways to attack it with Baker Mayfield? The only way the football team wins this matchup is if Baker has a complete dud of a day and if Haskins impresses. Now, I don't believe this will happen, but it's always a possibility, and given I don't believe this will happen, I'll take the Browns 31-14. Next up, we've got the Bengals against the Eagles. Up to this point in the season, Burrow has outplayed Carson Wentz as a quarterback, and I didn't think I'd be saying this up to this point. The Bengals come into this game with an 0-2 record, but stayed impressively competitive through both. The Eagles are the better team overall, but I believe Burrow can pull out a first career win this week. I don't think it's going to get much harder for him than throwing 61 total passes, and I'm going to give him benefit of the doubt here. He put on a monster performance for a rookie in Week 2 against a solid pass rush in the Browns, so expect him to build off this in Week 3. I mean, Joe Burrow is the man for the Bengals, and he's just beginning to prove it. He'll have another true chance at winning in Week 3, and if his offense and Tyler Boyd and A.J. Green show up for him again, he can put up another daunting performance against what is historically known as a terrible Eagles secondary. The Eagles' pass rush isn't necessarily overly threatening either, which should give Burrow much more time to throw than he had in Week 2. For the Eagles, things will again be based on how well Wentz plays, though. He's thrown 4 picks through the first 2 games this season and is theoretically on pace to finish the season with 32 picks overall. Now, I don't think this will happen, but Wentz needs to clean up his play sooner rather than later. If Wentz can do that in Week 3, the Eagles will win against a lackluster defense in the Bengals. And if he fails to do this, Burrow will take advantage of it and win. So, as you can probably tell, this game falls less in the hands of Burrow and more in the hands of Wentz. The game is in his control before either team has stepped on the field, and he's not gained my trust up to this point. On the other hand, Burrow has. So that's why I'm taking the Bengals in this one, 24-20. Now next up, we've got the Patriots up against the suddenly red-hot Raiders offense, fresh off beating the New Orleans Saints. The Saints defense simply couldn't handle the mix between Henry Ruggs, a deep threat down all sides, and Darren Waller, aka Wall Street, who hauled in an insanely impressive 12 catches for 100 yards, mainly underneath, and a goal line touchdown catch. Now, Henry Ruggs got just one catch on Monday, but he hauled in a good chunk of yardage through pass interference penalties, something the Saints have had trouble with these first 2 weeks. Overall, though, the Raiders' offense is looking dangerous. It'll be interesting to see if the Patriots' secondary can slow down Waller and company, but I think they will. Belichick said in I think it was a press conference recently in these past few years, I'm not sure if there was the same press conference in which Bill Belichick looked like he was homeless. And if you haven't seen that, dear God, look up Bill Belichick on Twitter or on the internet and just click news, and you will see he had those sleeveless kind of cut off sweatshirts that he likes to wear, but it had a bunch of holes in it, and his hair was all over the place. It really looked like he just got out of bed or he just got done painting a roof or something. I don't know, but he did not look good. He said, I believe in that press conference, that they haven't seen a tight end like Waller in a good amount of time. But even with that, I think the Patriots secondary is good enough to slow down that pass game for the Raiders. They won't be able to slow down the run game as well, though. That's the tricky part. Josh Jacobs will get a good workload and will score at least one touchdown on Sunday. He'll continue to produce, and it'll help the Raiders to put up a fight against the Patriots. The one problem for the Raiders, though, will be their inability to stop Cam Newton. Cam Newton has been the focal point of the Patriots' offense, most surprisingly through the ground game. In each of the first 2 games of the year, Cam Newton led the Patriots in rushing yards as well as rushing touchdowns, so it's clear that Belichick knows how to use Cam. And even just 2 weeks into the season, it seems like the Patriots' offense has been near perfectly built around Cam in Bill Belichick fashion. Given the way Bill has built this offense around Cam and how dominant this secondary usually is, I doubt the Raiders will be able to keep up with Bill Belichick's offense at all. Even if Josh Jacobs has a dominant week, it'll be difficult to trust Derek Carr to succeed against that Patriots secondary. So I'll take the Patriots 34-17. Next up, we've got a game that should be easily won by the Falcons taking on the Bears. Now, the Bears' offense struggled in Week 2, and they nearly lost to the Lions. Overall, the Bears are a solid 8-8 team on paper, but Trubisky's poor play last week makes me skeptical on if they will be able to defeat the Falcons. We know the Falcons' defense is terrible, letting up 2 straight 38-point games, but we also know that Trubisky throws a lot of picks. Given this, I believe Trubisky won't be able to keep up with Matt Ryan, who is currently lighting opposing secondaries ablaze. The Bears, again, are a solid team, but not solid enough to best the Falcons. The Bears are 2-0, but they face the Lions and the Giants. I'd jump on the hype train only if the Bears were able to defeat those two teams a bit more convincingly. It was just too close for comfort against the Lions, and they didn't exactly dominate the Giants. Overall, their track record should tell you that they'll have a tough time beating the 0-2 Falcons. While the Falcons are indeed 0-2, that record is, similarly to the Bears, a bit faulty in telling just how good the team actually is. Their offense is brilliant, putting up over 25 points in 2 straight games, and Matt Ryan has been finding passes through the air on practically every play of the game. Now, opposing defenses can't seem to cover the Falcons' receiving core and can't seem to slow down Matt Ryan. And the Falcons also lost 2 convincing teams in the Seahawks and the Cowboys, both of which are possible playoff teams, so I'll take the Falcons in this one, 31-20. Next up, we've got the Rams against the Bills. This should be a bit more of a competitive, or should I say exciting matchup. The Rams look impressive up to this point, sitting at 2-0 after defeating the Cowboys and the Eagles, both of which have solid rosters, both offensively and defensively. And as for the Bills, well, they also sit at 2-0, after comfortably beating the Jets by 10 and barely holding on to a win against the Dolphins by 3. I'll give the Bills a bit of a break in the fact that these are divisional matchups, but it's still worrying to see their defense let the Dolphins put 28 points on them. Yet again, though, the Patriots did that in Week 17 of last season, so maybe Fitz is just great against division rivals. Either way, though, this is a game that could easily fall either way. The Bills are 2-0, and the Rams are 2-0 against teams, or teams that don't necessarily pop out of the schedule when you see their names, like the Seahawks, Chiefs, and Ravens do. Simply put, not impressive wins on either side of the table. Even with this, though, I'm going to have to give benefit of the doubt to the Bills on this one. Josh Allen has momentum in this one, coming off of a 4-touchdown, 400-yard performance last week, and Allen will build off this performance to throw over 250 yards here in Week 3 and likely win the game. I'll give this one to the Bills, 26-24. Next up here, we've got the Steelers against the Texans. This should and will be a very fun game to watch. We know the Steelers have a solid roster, and we know Big Ben will find ways to move the ball. I know I've been very much on the Big Ben hype train this season, but after watching his first 2 games of the year, I'm more confident than ever that he'll find ways to move the ball and to score points in every game he plays. Now, the Steelers are 2-0 after scoring 26 in both of their first 2 games. Granted, they weren't overly amazing wins, as they beat Jeff Driscoll, backup quarterback for the Broncos, by 5, and the Giants by 10. Again, not impressive wins, but wins nonetheless. For the Texans, things look a bit worse. They've failed to break past 20 points in both of their first 2 games, losing to the Chiefs and the Ravens. And for these games, it makes sense that they lose. They lost against top teams. What scares me, though, is their inability to create scoring opportunities for their offense, and more importantly, their protection of Deshaun Watson. The Texans' O-line has allowed 8 sacks in the first 2 games of the season, and had Watson been a pocket quarterback, it would have been many more. Basically meaning Watson is being forced to scramble on an abnormally large amount of offensive plays, something that is extremely unhealthy for this offense given their lack of scoring in the past 2 weeks against teams you need to score against to have a shot. In the end, though, I'll give the Texans benefit of the doubt. They've had 2 games against top teams, while the Steelers played 2 average teams. Considering Drew Lock was out in Week 2, I'll believe it'll be a nail-biter, but I also believe that Deshaun Watson will find a way to put up over 20 points and lead the Texans to a 28-24 victory over the Steelers to get their first win of the season. Now next up, we've got the Vikings against the Titans. By my own mistake, I gave the Vikings the benefit of the doubt in Week 1 and Week 2. The Vikings went on to lose both, allowing the Packers to put up over 40 and allowing the Colts to put up over 25. Now, 2 bad defensive performances by the Vikings and 1 terrible performance by Kirk Cousins has caused me to take it all back. I'm not giving the Vikings my bets now, as they've proved me wrong twice in a row. I believe the Vikings would be a steady team once again this season, but following an 0-2 start, it's hard to say that the Vikings have much of a shot at making the NFC Championship for the 2nd year in a row. Now, I hate to call it quits on a team so early in the year, but unless the Vikings can find consistency, I'm not going to bet on them to win many games from here on out. The Titans, on the other hand, are 2-0. And while they didn't play amazing teams, they had solid quarterback performances in both games, something the Vikings couldn't seem to do. Even with the Vikings' amazing Week 1 offensive performance, I'm not going to trust Kirk Cousins to take out the 2-0 Titans. Instead, I'll have to bet on the Vikings to get their first win of the season sometime in some other week. But for now, I'll take the Titans 27-20. Again, this is one of those games where the Vikings could surprise me, but after seeing last week's performance, it's really hard for me to see the Vikings beating the 2-0 Texans in Week 3, although they may prove me wrong. Now next up, we've got the Panthers against the Chargers. This should be another fun one, as it's 2 teams who haven't really found their identity yet, or more simply lost it. For the Panthers, life without McCaffrey hasn't been seen in ages. They haven't had to adjust to a game plan that isn't built around that running back, and I'm afraid it'll be difficult for them to adjust well over the course of 1 week. Teddy Bridgewater is a solid quarterback, but only when he's given a good team to work with. It's a mistake that many teams often make. I'm not blaming the Panthers. Analyzing the quarterback for their own play in terms of stats and success, and completely ignoring the team they were given to work with. Practically every quarterback currently starting in the NFL could find the playoffs on a team or franchise like the Patriots or the Chiefs or the Saints, but once given control of a horse with 3 legs compared to a noble steed, it gets a bit harder to look so solid as a quarterback. For Bridgewater, I think this is the case. He's a solid quarterback with a solid team, but an average at best quarterback with an average at best team. The Panthers won't make the playoffs this year, and that's not entirely Teddy's fault. If they build a more solid defense around him, he could probably find more success in the long run, but until then, he won't do much in Carolina outside of a 7-9, 6-10 season. Having said this, the same goes for Herbert and the Chargers. Tyrod Taylor is out for the indefinite future with a punctured lung, ironically caused by the Chargers team doctor, but Herbert played surprisingly well in Week 2 against the Chiefs, but not well enough to beat them. The Panthers have let up 2 straight 30-point games, and while I think they'll improve in this game, I do believe Herbert can play a sound enough football game to take out the McCaffrey-less Panthers 20-17. Next up, we've got the Jets against the Colts. The Colts are coming off of an impressive win over the Vikings, in which the Colts defense held the Vikings to just 11 points and created 3 interceptions out of the hands of Kirk Cousins. The defense was impressive in Week 2, and I think this will continue into Week 3 against a Jets team that hasn't broken 17 points on the year. Expect Darnold to have a pair of turnovers, whether it is through the air or a fumble, and expect the Jets to put up a weak 14 points. The Jets simply don't have much of an identity up to this point. Frank Gore has practically eliminated Le'Veon Bell's name from the Jets organization, given that Bell hasn't gotten much of any production this season, and Gore hasn't been all too impressive either. Darnold seems to be doing okay with the pieces he's been given, but I still think it's past time for the Jets to move on from Darnold, or to build a great team around him. Those are their only 2 options, and it seems a bit late for Darnold at this point. He's still making terrible rookie mistakes here in year 3, and it's only continuing to fuel the fire rather than put it out. The Jets organization clearly made a mistake in hiring Adam Gase, as he seemingly was the prime puzzle piece in the disappearance of Jamal Adams. And when your head coach shoos away your top defensive player from your team, it should be clear that he is not running operations on or off the field very well. Now, the Colts are going to dominate the Jets on the field this Sunday, and Darnold is going to continue to struggle under pressure. He'll make some more costly mistakes and will send the Jets to an 0-3 record at the end of this weekend. So overall, I'll take the Phillip Rivers-led Colts to best the Jets 34-14. Now next up, we've got the Cowboys and the Seahawks. While I think this will be a more competitive matchup than the last, I still don't think Dak Prescott will be able to beat Russell Wilson in the slightest. Dak will move the ball, as that offense tends to do, but as often seen against top teams, it won't be enough. The Cowboys' defense will let up right around 30 to 35 points, and the offense won't be able to keep up. They'll definitely go down swinging, but the idea that they're the ones going down is practically a given. I'm not sure if anyone can legitimately say they expect Dak Prescott and the Cowboys to take out Russell Wilson and the Seahawks after Bill Belichick and Cam Newton failed to do so. Wilson is coming into this game having thrown 9 touchdowns through 2 games, and I believe he'll throw another 3 today, creating a 12-touchdown total at the end of Week 3. Chris Carson will also have a solid day, rushing for over 100 yards and a touchdown against the Cowboys. And overall, I'd love to jump on the Cowboys hype train after defeating the Falcons by just 1 point and losing to the Rams by 3, but I think it's fair to say that that'd be taking it a bit too far considering their upcoming matchup. The Cowboys are looking promising after Week 2, but promising isn't enough to beat the Seahawks. I'll take the Seahawks in this one, 31-23. Next up, we've got a game that should be easily picked by anyone at this point in the season, the Cardinals against the Lions. Now, we didn't expect the Cards to start 2-0 this season, especially with a Week 1 matchup against the 49ers, but what did we expect? For the Lions to go 0-2, which they have. In Week 1, the Lions failed to hold a late-game lead given up to the Trubisky-led Chicago Bears. In Week 1, though, the Lions had some positives. First off, Peterson ran for over 90 yards, a surprise at the very least. And if I'm being honest, I expected DeAndre Swift to get the brunt of the carries in Week 1, but boy was I wrong. On the receiving end, Danny Amendola looked very promising with over 80 yards receiving on the day, and overall, Stafford didn't necessarily disappoint, throwing for a touchdown and a pick with nearly 300 yards on the day. In Week 2, it was more of the same for Stafford with 2 touchdowns and a pick and over 200 yards passing. Not a terrible day, but not a brilliant one either. On the ground, things were a bit less consistent, but they managed to pull together over 80 yards on the ground despite that. Defensively in Week 2, they really struggled, letting up 40 points against the Packers, a game in which I'm sure many of us, including me, expected a bit of a blowout. And overall in this one, I'd say the Lions simply have the worst team. They can't seem to find consistency in terms of ground productivity and can't seem to find chemistry on defense. Overall, the Lions are a team I'm going to bet against nearly every week this year, including this one. I'll take the Cardinals 28-17. Next up, we've got the Bucs against the Broncos, another game that's relatively easy to predict. The Bucs should have Godwin back, a weapon they missed in Week 2 due to a concussion, and are coming off of a nice offensive performance in Week 2 all around. Leonard Fournette looked brilliant for the Bucs with over 100 yards on the ground and a game-sealing touchdown in the fourth to bring the Bucs to a 14-point lead. And overall, I'd say the Bucs have to clear momentum heading into week 3. The only problem they need to address is drops. They had an ungodly amount of drops last week, including 2 easy touchdown catches that led to a punt and a field goal instead. And if they can bring down the drops and haul in open balls deep, expect the Bucs to put up over 30 once again. Not to mention, the Broncos are going to adjust to life without Drew Lock or Courtland Sutton, something that'll be difficult for them to handle. Expect the Broncos offense to struggle to break the 20-point mark, and expect the Bucs to find offensive success early and often. I'll take the Buccaneers in this one, 34-13. Now next up, we've got the Packers against the Saints, a Sunday night matchup that shouldn't fail to impress, given the idea that Breeze can get his act together on Sunday night. He's played poorly in the last 2 games, throwing some oddly inaccurate passes for a guy named Drew Brees, and considering the fact that he considered retirement this offseason, I'm starting to wonder if there was a deeper regression-based reason as to why. I don't share the same bias for Drew Brees as many do, due to me not really seeing him as a top 3 quarterback in the league today. I think that's fair of me to say, to hand that over to Pat Mahomes, Lamar, and Russell Wilson. All 3 looking like top-tier players so far this season, and on the other hand, Breeze seems a bit off. He's missed a number of wide-open receivers, and after watching this past Monday night matchup, it seems more clear than ever that Breeze has seriously regressed over this past offseason. And I'm almost to the point where I'd say Breeze has regressed even more than Brady has in the past year. I hate to say it, because I want Breeze to succeed in his final year or two, but I can't ignore what I see on the field from him. On the other hand, Rodgers has looked revived recently, starting 2-0 and putting up 40 points in both wins. I think he'll put over 30 in this matchup, and I feel like Brees' regression will be plastered on live TV for all NFL fans to see. He won't play terribly, but it'll be clear who the better quarterback is this Sunday night. I'm taking Rodgers with a 31-26 win over the Saints. Now finally, we've got the Chiefs against the Ravens, a game that shouldn't fail to impress. It's a matchup yet again made in heaven, and it'll definitely be a nail-biter. This game will simply come down to overall execution, primarily on offense. And this game will, after the past week's performance offensively by the Chiefs, I hesitate to immediately give them benefit of the doubt here. Overall, though, I'll give it to them based on the idea that it seems to be a one-game fluke and performance by that Chiefs team, something you always see from a Super Bowl team the following year, given they don't have a crazy hangover the year after. So, I'll take the Chiefs in this one, 35-27. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this podcast and listening to this week's predictions. If you made it this far, then you must have liked it. Check out the YouTube page at Fifth Down Huddle. Give it a subscription if you aren't already there. It would really help me out. Give me a follow on Spotify. And if you want, check out the Twitter and Instagram page at Fifth Down Huddle for video updates, full game recaps, fantasy tips and tricks, NFL news, NFL live game updates. Anything you can think of NFL related, you'll find there. But either way, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for huddling up with me, and I will see you on Monday night with my full game recaps from this weekend. Thank you, and goodbye.